Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Admiral, congratulations. Thanks for your wonderful service to you and your family. Couple quick questions. You talk about readiness. How important is it that we pass the Coast Guard bill that looks like we're going to be bringing up to the floor this week?
Senator, the Coast Guard authorization bill, I assume that's the bill you're speaking to, sir. There's always provisions in there that are important to the Coast Guard. I know the Coast Guard authorization bill often becomes a vehicle for some broader maritime issues that are often very difficult. One of the issues I understand has been around is the ballast water, the Vessel Incident Discharge Act provisions, and clearly leadership guidance from Congress on how the nation should proceed there is helpful. We remain.
I'm talking about your troops. How important is it to pass the Coast Guard bill this week? Do you want the Coast Guard bill passed this week?
Senator, Coast Guard bill being passed this week would be helpful.
Does it help on readiness? You talked about readiness. Does it help on readiness?
Yes, it helps on readiness.
Okay. It's good that you're advocating for the passage of the Coast Guard bill.
Senator, I didn't mean to imply that I wasn't advocating for that. I just said
yeah,
we've gone many years in the past, sometimes with a 4 to 7 year gap without an authorization bill, and while that's not ideal, the work of the Coast Guard does go forward. But the enabling legislation, sir, is always appreciated and helpful.
Let me ask, as the chair of the subcommittee on the Coast Guard, you and I talked about kind of the recapitalization, and do you commit, if you're confirmed, to work with this committee, not just on the recap, but the laydown of the forces that are part of that recapitalization in terms of our oversight responsibilities?
Senator, you have my personal commitment to always work with our oversight committees on those issues that are important to the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives. We would welcome a dialogue that allows us to understand your requirements, your political interests, and we would offer you where we think the best utilization of those assets provided by the Congress are. And I think there's a space in there where we can hopefully do the best by the nation.
Okay, it's something we do on the Armed Services Committee, on all the committees, right? It's an important role, so we are going to be very involved in that, and hopefully the Coast Guard, if you're confirmed, will be receptive, but that's a big part of our job. I'd like to talk about my state. Senator Klobuchar talked about 10,000 lakes. My state has more coastline than the rest of the country combined.
Yes, sir.
We certainly view the Coast Guard in light of what you do for Alaskans every day, which is heroic efforts. It's remarkable. I have, and you and I have talked about it, I've been a little concerned about some of the future planning operations, given that whether it's the Arctic, whether it's receding ice, whether it's opening transportation, surface transportation, whether it's fishing, almost 60% of all seafood harvested in America comes from my state's waters. You had expressed, when you and I met earlier, you expressed the importance of a maximum patrol boat coverage for Alaska. Can you commit to me to the 2112 home porting model for the fast response cutters?
Senator, yes, I can.
And I think you and I have also talked about the community of Petersburg, Alaska, and it's losing a 110-foot island-class patrol boat. I'm concerned about the Coast Guard's ability to meet the needs of Southeast Alaskans, especially in the near shore and inside passage areas where there's an enormous amount of cruise ship traffic. Can I get your commitment to work with me and my team on my concerns that I've raised with you with regard to what's going on in Petersburg, Alaska as well?
Senator, you have my commitment. We talked potentially about some 87-foot coastal patrol boats to possibly fill some of those localities that you're keenly and other members of the Alaska delegation are interested in. So the fast response cutters are programmed for 2,500 hours, replacing an aging 110-foot island-class patrol boat that's currently programmed at 1,800 hours, and we're not getting close to that across the numbers. I think you'll see about a 20% increase in capacity with the fast response cutters, sir, but the door is open for that conversation about those 87 coastal patrol boats rounding out the Alaska patrol boat laydown.
Okay, I'd like to, again, get your commitment to, my view is what's going on in Alaska with the Arctic, with the fishing, with the rescues, is there's a dramatic increase in the need for coverage, and as part of the recapitalization effort, I think it's imperative that at the end of the day, we have more assets up in the great state of Alaska, which covers an entire strategic area for the country, the Arctic and other areas in northern Pacific. Let me ask one final question. I know my time's very limited here, but you mentioned to me the Coast Guard has recently committed to support the Navy's 7th Fleet in the South China Sea. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. A number of members here are on the Armed Services Committee. I couldn't agree more with the importance of the South China Sea and the Navy. We're trying to build a 355-ship Navy. I do get concerned, though, to be perfectly blunt, about combatant commanders looking at more platforms saying, hey, I need a Coast Guard cutter here or in CENTCOM or in AFRICOM or somewhere else. Can I have your commitment to work with us? And this is both members. There's a lot of members who are on this committee and the Armed Services Committee. I get a little worried about, we have a lot of needs for the Coast Guard. My state has enormous needs for the Coast Guard. The Great Lakes has enormous needs for the Coast Guard. And I just get a little concerned when I hear, you know, that PACOM now wants some cutters to do patrols in the South China Sea. I'm worried about that. And look, we need more assets. That's why we're building a big Navy. But I'm not so sure that's the best use of the Coast Guard. Do you have any thoughts on that right now? But A, can we get your commitment to work on a bipartisan way to make sure we're not sending the men and women of the Coast Guard, who do great work, I love them, but out to places where I'm not sure I would call that primary mission running patrols in the South China Sea. You have any thoughts on that?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. If I go back just briefly on the last question about the patrol boats, one ask for you there, sir, would be, I think as you know and as we discussed, siting any platform in Alaska is challenging. We are committed. The housing money is helpful. Getting that right so it enables our men and women on the front lines to do the missions, getting the right support facilities. We just welcome the continued support of the Alaska delegation there. So
we would have that, but I want to remind you, it's challenging, but it's also, I get frustrated when I meet with Coast Guard officials, say, well, it's too costly. It's too costly. No, it's not. You got a job to do to cover this part of America, right? And put it in your budget, what you're going to need, and we will support it. But, I mean, the notion that the bean counters are constantly saying, oh, it's too costly, we can't do maintenance. You can do maintenance there. I was just in the Vigor shipyard in Ketchikan. You can do plenty of maintenance there. So we need to kind of change the mindset a little bit here, where if you need to cover a part of America, which is my state, then that's what you should be requesting, not bean counters who are saying, no, we got to keep everybody in the lower 48 because it's too costly. It's not too costly. It's part of the mission. And I've been hearing that too much from the Coast Guard, Admiral, and to be honest, I'm going to need strong commitments from you on this, where that kind of thinking is frustrating to me.
Senator, I appreciate your frustration. You have my commitment to work with you on that space, to go on budget for our asks. Sir, if I can, I'll pivot to your question about the national security cutters. There is a demand for Coast Guard services across the globe, sir, and a large proportion of our day-to-day force laid on, about 40% of our major cutters, our maritime patrol aircraft, our helicopters, particularly our airborne use force helicopters, support the combatant commanders, whether it's on the front line on drugs, other niche capabilities. Sir, we bring some unique authorities, unique capabilities. For 2019, the Commandant has pushed into the global force management process the availability of a national security cutter. I recognize your concerns. It's a zero-sum game. There are competing national security interests. We have my colleague, the new PACOM commander, is having a hearing today. I will certainly engage Admiral Davison pending his successful confirmation about how he views the Coast Guard roles there, sir, and we will have that appropriate conversation about national and homeland security and the appropriate niche role for the Coast Guard in that.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan.